So hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our panel. My name is Meghana and I will be moderating. I'm calling in from San Francisco, which I want to acknowledge is traditional Ohlone land. We are here to learn from our incredible panelists about what it means to include different voices at the table, bring power to underrepresented groups, and undo the harms of environmental injustices in carbon dioxide removal. As CDR takes flight, social equity and social acceptance are extremely important. They're not only morally important, but pragmatic and imperative to the long-term success of industry. And before we jump into our panel, a quick note on Hopin, the platform we're on today. So here's how Hopin works. If you're familiar with Clubhouse, we have the ability to bring in more participants besides our panelists here. So you can actually come up on stage and ask a question or join the discussion. So for the first 25 minutes, it'll just be me and our three panelists. But for the second half of the panel, I'll be bringing in participants to join our discussion. That means you can come up and ask a question or even stay a bit and have a conversation. So please have your audio and video ready to go. Before I bring you up, I'll say your name so that it's not totally sudden. I'll also be taking questions from the chat, but probably only after people have hopped in. So yes, let us introduce our wonderful panelists today. We have three amazing panelists who work at the intersection of carbon removal and social and environmental justice. First, we have Eloise. Eloise Buckland is the CEO and co-founder of HUSK, a high-impact social enterprise with a mission to improve smallholder livelihoods, regenerate soil, and sequester carbon by transforming rice husk into biochar products in Cambodia. Next, we have Wizipan Little Elk. Wizipan Little Elk is a citizen of the Sikangu Oyate, colonially known as the Rosebud Sioux tribe, where he serves as the CEO for a place-based ecosystem of organizations creating wealth and opportunity through business, community development, and asset building. Weezy previously served as the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs at the Department of the Interior. Last but not least, we have Joe James. Joe James is an ag tech entrepreneur who invented and patented processes which capture large amounts of CO2 using biocrops to combat climate change while providing other services which promote environmental justice. And then he creates jobs in poor urban and rural communities, converting plant material into circular economy bioproducts. So I'm very excited for the conversation that we will all have together today. Yeah, and I think a great way to get started would be if each of you could share just for about 2 minutes on what is the role you are in today. Go for it, Joe, if you want to get started.
You want me to start?
That would be great.
Okay. My company is growing very special biocrops that go from 0 to 20 feet in 6 months. They capture nearly 4 times the amount of CO2 from the atmosphere as an equal acreage of trees would. They also provide other environmental services like remediating air, soil, and water. And in the case of COVID-19, they also can screen out airborne particulate matter that makes COVID-19 that much more severe. We then harvest the crops, and as you said earlier, we convert them into a variety of bioproducts, including a filler powder, which is a bio-based alternative to carbon black. You might know that tires are 30% carbon black, and most plastics, many plastics that are black are filled with a polymer and then carbon black. So we make something that's better. We also make a superior poultry house bedding that's more absorbent and controls ammonia better. And then we harvest the litter and carbonize that and turn it into a nutrient-rich biochar, a soil amendment.
Thank you, Joe. Weezy or Eloise?
Sure, I'll go. Hamitakepi, iha chante washten ape chusa pelo, Wizipra emacha pelo, na sichagu la kota hemacha. Good afternoon, everyone. I greet each and every one of you with a good heart. My name is Wizipan. Everyone knows me by Wizi. I'm the CEO for Redco and our ecosystem of organization doing place-based work here on the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Central South Dakota. We operate an ecosystem of organizations that run businesses. We have nonprofit initiatives and an emerging community development financial institution, and we do policy work. Mostly what I'm going to talk about today is one of our businesses, which we really believe leans in and embodies what we would call the new Lakota economy, or businesses with multiple bottom lines that directly address socioeconomic inequity and climate change at the same time.
I guess it's my turn. Hi, everyone. My name's Eloise Buckland, and I am the CEO and co-founder of HUSK. And we are a social enterprise with a mission to regenerate soils and sequester carbon and improve smallholder livelihoods. And how we do that is we take an age-old practice, which is turning rice husk into biochar, and add some contemporary technology and an innovative circular economy model by putting pyrolysis installations into rice mills to bring back this age-old practice of restoring soil. And our first operation is in Cambodia, where we have, in the last couple of years, produced around 250 tons of biochar, which we sell to smallholder farmers in the form of different carbon-based soil improvers, carbon-based fertilizers, and biostimulants to help restore very degraded soils, increase yields, and of course sequester carbon. And we're delighted to be on this panel because our mission is to really bring back the value of biochar to the majority of the smallholder farmers on the planet who basically feed the world. So I think over 1.5 billion farmers have less than 1 hectare of land, and on that grow over 60% of the world's food. And they're the ones that suffer the most from climate change and from soil degradation. And what we're doing is trying to make biochar affordable and accessible for those smallholder farmers to keep growing the food that we all need to survive this next era. So yeah, delighted to be here and share the story.
Thank you all for sharing. Thank you for helping us set some context. My first question is, carbon dioxide removal has the potential to address historically racist and colonialist environmental injustices. So I want to know from the three of you, can anti-oppression be a part of this work? And how are you bringing power to people who have been historically underrepresented against in the work that you are doing?
Who's
Should we
first?
take the same sequence, starting with Joe?
Okay, so I'm a former 33-year economic development professional, and I got into that profession inspired by Dr. King, who I believe realized that all the civil rights legislation in the world didn't mean very much if you were poor. You really couldn't enjoy your freedom. And so I began my work in this area with that focus after that career. And I was trying to find a way of adding value to biomass as a way of creating jobs in rural communities. And I kept looking for technologies and processes that would help make it more cost effective. But I always had in mind, how can whatever it is that I'm doing benefit those communities that are most at risk? And so I would say that the CDR, or carbon removal and capture effort, can be, if you're intentional, you can design your technology from the start to have it be more beneficial to those communities, not only providing, reducing the impacts of climate change, but also other impacts that the community is suffering from. I mentioned that our crops are good at screening out airborne particulate matter, Well, unfortunately, too many communities of color are downwind from power plants and other sources like that. So we can help there. And then brownfield sites, we can remediate brownfield sites. And then lastly, as we harvest our crops, we intend to create jobs for the very communities that we're trying to protect, converting our material into a variety of cost-effective or cost-advantaged bioproducts that I mentioned earlier.
That's awesome. You know, when you asked the question, it took me back to a conversation I had with an uncle of mine last fall, and he was telling me a story about, you know, the early 1980s, 70s, the late 70s, when a group of, you know, folk leadership when leadership from one of the big green organizations came out to our area to meet with spiritual leaders to ask, you know, what can be done about climate change. And the answer that the spiritual leader said was this: the earth, that she has her own way of healing herself, and that no matter what happens, she's going to heal herself and to heal the environment. What's happening is that humans are not treating other humans with dignity, with justice, and that if we want to address climate change, we really should be focusing on addressing social issues and social inequity. And that if we treat each other right, that will provide the framework for us to treat plants, animals, and the natural world in a way that is right and just. And so our work, I think, in many ways, you know, kind of builds on that. We are creating the world's, what will become the world's largest Native American owned and managed buffalo herd. We'll end up owning 7% of all Native American owned buffalo. It's a 28,000 acre regenerative buffalo ranch located on our land that will be home to 1,500 buffalo. It will be producing between 300 and 400 surplus animals per year that will be, you know, harvested in a humane way, and that our buffalo will also be raised in a humane way that treats them as buffalo and not as any other animal. It will create jobs. It has the ability to create other ancillary businesses. We're looking at developing a meat processing facility. But more importantly, you know, and I think even bigger than that is bringing justice to buffalo, and our relationship as Lakota, as indigenous people, is integrally tied to buffalo. We call ourselves buffalo people. In 1800, there were 60 million buffalo. By 1900, there were less than 1,000 buffalo. A genocide was committed against them, and a part of that reason was and this is, you know, written in the old documents, was specifically to destroy our economy and make us dependent on the federal government so that they could take our land. And for us, bringing back buffalo it's good for them. We should be doing that, but it's a much bigger part of a much bigger narrative around equity and justice and rebirth, and creating prosperity and opportunity for not only us, but for the rest of the globe, while addressing climate change, while creating jobs, etc. So I think that those two issues around climate and equity and social justice are inextricably tied to one another, and you can't address one without addressing the other.
Yeah, no, that was so well said.
It's fascinating to hear about buffalo. Is taking me to Cambodia, where the rice farmers that we work with use buffalo and well, no, probably not the same species, but they use cows to work their land. And really, you know, I mentioned the 1.5 billion people that live off rice production in the world. These communities are earning on average $5 a day or less, working, you know, 1 hectare, 1 field, 1 cow to plow through this thick clay soil. And climate change, you might think, seems very distant to this kind of community. But on our first trip to Southeast Asia, myself and co-founder Carol Rios, we asked a lot of farmers. We went from house to house talking to the farmers, understanding what are their challenges, what keeps them awake at night, what are they, you know, what are they struggling with. And I'd say 99% of them said climate change. They, the weather was getting more extreme, it was less predictable, the soils were being weathered, and yet, interestingly, the solution is restoring soils, getting the carbon back into the soil, is an ancient practice that they've been doing for thousands of years. So we had this kind of, imperialistic ego that we would have some kind of solution to help with the soils and to help combat climate change. And actually, what was just the most humble moment for me in the journey with HUSK was realizing that actually the solution was right there, and is this ancient practice of turning rice husk into charcoal, putting it back in the soil, and therefore making the soil soft, enabling it to hold water, to weather the storm or survive the drought, depending on what was being hit. And the injustice was that through industrialization, most of these small rice farmers don't have access to their own rice husk anymore, which is the biomass that they've grown, because their rice paddy is taken to the mill, it accumulates there, and they end up buying cheap synthetic fertilizers that further degrade the soil. So where we felt that we could add some justice to this situation was taking this old wisdom of turning rice husk into biochar, but putting the technology in the rice mill so that they could then access the biochar from their own rice husk and not have to resort to the chemical fertilizers. And I'm really pleased to say that 3 years on, we now have data from over 220 farms showing that the return on investment from the farmers buying our products at a very affordable price is positive. So they're getting increasing yields, an average of 26% in the increase in yield, a positive return on their investment in terms of buying the biochar and using it. And this is really exciting, because it's taking an age-old practice, giving farmers access to something that's affordable and effective, and not having to resort to the short-term usual green fertilizer practice. So what we're aiming to do now is blueprint this model and take it elsewhere, because the world is not short of soil degradation, and it's not short of rice husk, and there's plenty of opportunity with what we've piloted in Cambodia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Eloise. And I think listening to the three of you, we're hearing these common themes of industrialization, exploitation that happens during colonization, and how do we undo these harms in the work that we are doing. And I think it's amazing to hear the different perspectives that you are all bringing to this. And in a similar vein, I'm curious for all of you, what is the role of Indigenous practices and community input in the work that you are doing? Like, how is the community being involved?
I guess I start again, is that correct? Okay. We are very fortunate. My Maryland operating affiliate company was selected by the Exelon Foundation's Climate Change Investment Initiative last July to demonstrate an urban application of our process. It's called the CRBBP process, without spelling out the entire name. That's where we plant these crops and use them in a way and harvest them and do all those things. So we're now working in Baltimore, and we work in collaboration with the community. Among the first people that I met were leaders of community organizations who are trying to grapple with some of the issues of contamination and hazardous materials that are plaguing many parts of an old industrial city. So we work closely with the community, not only to figure out where we should treat, what sites we should treat and how we should treat them, but also we want to begin to train residents of the community to be workers on the manufacturing side, helping us make the various types of bioproducts. There are other applications that we're exploring. For example, California has a terrible environmental challenge caused by what's called the Salton Sea in Southern California, which was a, how can I say it, mistakenly made 900 square mile lake many, many years ago. And due to evaporation is now a 300 square mile lake, and leaving a 600 square mile former lake bed, or playa, as they say. That's a dust bowl with contaminated dust in it that's blowing into Native American communities and Hispanic communities to the south, where the Salton Sea is currently located. So we look forward to an opportunity to possibly plant that 600 acres or portions thereof with a crop that's going to absorb about 14 tons of CO2 per acre per year, and use that crop to reduce the dispersion of dust, to pull out some of the toxins that are in the soil, and then to create employment opportunities for the residents of the area. So we have urban approaches, we have rural approaches. We can complement wastewater treatment plant facilities where you can't build a full-scale mechanical plant. You can build a smaller mechanical function and spray semi-clean water into fields in which our crops are located. And again, do all those other good things with our crops that I mentioned earlier. So we've got lots of different approaches that we can take, and we look forward to partnering with folks really on a global basis.
Thanks, Joe.
I would say I'm a little bit biased, but I think that history is on our side, that the world and humanity cannot afford not to listen to indigenous people. It was, Chief Sitting Bull, in the 1800s, after he traveled the world, he came home and he said, and the white man, talking about Western civilization, so the white man knows how to make everything, but does not know how to distribute it. And those words could not ring more true today. And it was, Chief Seattle who was said to have said, basically continue to, defecate in your own bed and you will suffocate in your own excrement. And, that's getting at what's happening with climate change. Continue to destroy our world, we're not going to have a world to live in anymore. And so indigenous people, and not just here in North America, but indigenous people across the globe, have been sounding the bell, ringing the alarm for centuries now about what is happening with a consumerism-based culture and what that will lead to from a social perspective and from a climate perspective. And, we've been talking about this stuff for a while. We have the solutions. We know what the path forward is. And so one of the things we talk about is we say, like our buffalo project, we need 10,000 more of these. And it doesn't have to necessarily be buffalo, but it does have to embody what we would call indigenous 7-gen thinking. And for us, 7-generation thinking means 3 things. First, act in the best interests of your great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren. If you do that, it will reorientate your entire worldview, and it will put the good of the group above the good of the individual, which leads to the second point. We must make moral and ethical based decisions where we're not taking more than we're giving, to avoid the tragedy of the commons. And then finally, indigenous thinking, 7-gen thinking requires us to embrace complex decision making, to this idea and understanding that everything sits in relation to something else, and that every action that any one of us take will have some reaction throughout the universe. And I love these kind of discussions. My grandmother used to say, watch what you think. She said, your thought can have an impact on a star in another galaxy. And you might hear something like that and think it's crazy. But let's go back to the smartest scientific thinkers in the world, who if we put her in a room with these guys studying and these women studying quantum theory, quantum mechanics, where you can have 2 states of existence at the same time in 2 different galaxies at the same time, all of a sudden that kind of thinking and that wisdom becomes much more real. And we as indigenous people have been talking about this stuff for centuries, and it's time to start listening.
Thank you for sharing those principles of the Indigenous 7th generation thinking. I think that's a really helpful framework for even just thinking about carbon dioxide removal and the decisions we're making.
It's very inspiring to hear this. I now have to thank the grandmother of my grandmother, who maybe had this fantastic thought of, yes, you can restore a third of the world's planet, which is currently degraded, by transforming the number 3 biomass on the world that is accumulates, which is rice husk. So after corn and wheat, rice is the 3rd largest by volume crop that we grow on this planet. And when myself and my co-founder found out that 20% of that crop by volume, so I'm talking about 150 million tons of biomass, is produced and burnt, but in the olden times was turned back into charcoal and put into the soil, we just thought that this is just this most incredible opportunity, which is why we're on this path to transform this wasted, undervalued biomass into something that is enriching, that is restoring soil and people's livelihoods. So I feel, our focus has not been to work specifically with Indigenous communities, but we do work with smallholder farmers in Southeast Asia and hopefully in other countries soon, who come from multiple different groups and communities. But this is very inspiring to hear about the 7th generation and what you're talking about. And the life I have is right now just taking hold of this massive opportunity. There's a huge global shift, grandmothers now that I'm feeling, that means that we can do things quickly and at scale and in a way that is dignified for the people that are suffering the most from some soil degradation, poverty, and climate change. And I guess from HUSK, what we're learning is how do we use business for good? So we're a social enterprise, we are a business, we need to make this work in the long term. And what is really wonderful is seeing that this is working for farmers, this is working for us as a business. And we haven't talked about it very much, but for all those people out there who want to remove carbon from the atmosphere and pay others to do it, and how we get that funding down to smallholder farmers or to buffalo reserves is really interesting. And for us, it's a way of making soil regeneration affordable and accessible. So capturing this carbon finance and channeling it into the hands of the people who really need it and who really are fixing carbon in the soil is a really exciting space to be working in.
Yeah, and I think that flows really well into something I wanted to touch on. Wizi, I know you had mentioned like how we are entrenched in a very consumerism-based society, and we have we're a part of this exploitative culture in some ways. So in the work that the 3 of you do, how do you understand who benefits and who has ownership of carbon dioxide removal initiatives versus who is facing the burdens and the harms?
Well, if I start again, I would say, following up on Eloise's comments, unfortunately, at the moment, the incentives, the carbon credits, 45Q is a federal tax incentive to encourage carbon capture. It's been structured, if you read through the way it operates, it's been structured basically to benefit the oil companies, because you get the highest benefit from capturing CO2 and then putting it into the ground and using it to pump out more oil. I'm not sure if that's the best use of federal incentives, which, as Eloise was saying, need in every way possible to help support people that are most adversely impacted by climate change. And in fact, while I don't believe it's the best practice to capture CO2 and then store it in the ground, if it can be converted into, if your process can convert it into something useful that still sequesters the carbon, so whether it's biochar or whether it's a filler powder that's used to make recyclable tires and plastics that are circular economy in nature, or other things like that. That, I think, would be as President Biden has been saying, that would be a job creation impact of carbon capture. And I think we should be thinking about how do we do those kinds of things in ways that help people that need jobs and need a benefit from this whole effort of carbon removal.
Thanks, Joe.
Kind of thinking about kind of the entire, kind of ecosystem of this space. Our work is primarily funded through, for this particular Buffalo project, is funded through blended capital, meaning, our model that we stood firm on is 20% investment. I'm sorry, 80% investment loans, 20% grants. And if you're an investor, it can be pretty attractive and the investor is going to benefit. They donate through a family foundation or a direct donation, and they get a tax write-off. They're loaning us money, and our model provides a 3 to 4% payback. Okay, some people might say that's below market, but you're definitely, you're gonna make money on this. We're creating jobs. And I would say, in some respects, the buffalo and the planet are some of the ones that are benefiting the most, because in our model, the buffalo are the ones who are doing the carbon capture, and they're the ones who are healing the environment because there's keystone species. So when you reintroduce buffalo to the Great Plains ecosystem, they're going to increase plant and animal diversity. And so your plant systems are going to go deeper down into the ground, and they're going to store more of that carbon down into the ground and overall strengthen the environment. And so we're not really doing any work. We're just giving them the opportunity to do what they do. Because again, we kind of started with this idea that Mother Earth, Grandmother Earth, she has her own systems. We're just providing an opportunity for her to do her work and for the buffalo to do their work. And we get to have a job. We get to have some high quality protein. And if you're an investor, you get to make money and feel good about doing this all at the same time, and even get a tax write-off on some of your money.
That's like hearing about different structures like blended capital could be really important in this space. Eloise, I don't know if there's something you wanted to add, but we are also approaching our halfway mark. And so at the same time, I want to ask our participants to start hopping in. Please feel free to ask to share your audio and your video and join our discussion, and please ask questions.
Just while people are thinking about their questions, I'd just like to share that we're really excited that we're the first biochar company outside the US and Europe to be certified as a carbon sink by the European Biochar Certificate, which means that we can sell carbon removal credits from making biochar for smallholder farmers in Cambodia on the voluntary carbon removal market. And this is enabling us, so the finance that is channeled through those credits is enabling us to make our products affordable for our customers who, as I mentioned before, earn less than $5 a day. So, so what we're kind of pioneering really is how do we use the existing and evolving accreditation systems in the voluntary carbon market to enable that finance to reach the people like the most remote smallholder farmers in emerging economies. And it's a very exciting space. It's growing fast, and we're really very happy to share our knowledge with how we've done that in Cambodia with others in other non-European, non-US countries where it's still very incipient.
And again, would like to open it up to our participants.
Well, if there's no one ready at the moment to ask a question, I'd like to make another comment if I could.
Oh, please go ahead, Joe.
No, Laura, go ahead, please.
Well, the thing that really strikes me about this conversation is that so many of the solutions that you're proposing for carbon dioxide removal are actually old things that we used to do long ago, are older practices, and we just need to reconnect with them. But do you find that you encounter resistance as you try to bring back older practices and make them relevant again?
Well, again, in the order that we've responded earlier, I would say that that the process that we're using is not necessarily an old process. We are using plants as a way of extracting CO2, and that's happening all the time. We just happen to be using supersized plants that get very big very quickly and disproportionately are capturing CO2. And then we're displacing where we can. We try to multitask the crop, both in its environmental work, but also even as we make products. So I mentioned that we have made a superior poultry house bedding, and then we capture the litter and convert that into a nutrient-rich biochar soil amendment that can also sequester the carbon that we've captured in the soil, even as it's helping to improve, crop productivity. I guess the other thing I would say that I wanted to say earlier is that I have the pleasure of serving as a fellow in something called the African Scientific Institute, and I chair that organization's Climate Crisis Committee. And when you look at the way that, if you look at the COVID-19 situation where the vaccines are being dispersed, you'll see, unfortunately, too much of the globe that is brown or black are not receiving those vaccines in a proportionate way. And there's a great fear that the climate remedies will be distributed in a similar manner unless we are creative in coming up with techniques that are easy to apply on a global basis and cost effective, and that we incentivize those practices as well. So I would want to say that I'm very concerned about the southern half of the world, trying to make sure that they are benefiting as much as the rest of the world, not only in capturing CO2, but also benefiting from the economic opportunities that at least processes that are like mine can help to generate.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Joe, for your comment. Always so nice to hear your experience come through when you're commenting these, because you're really, all of you here. I'm just honored to be here to ask questions to people who are doing the work today. And my question is maybe more directed to Wizzy. First, I'm calling in from the unceded lands of the Musqueam, Tsewutu, and Squamish people. My question is more directed to the land buyback program. There's one in the US. We know it's ending in the very near term. How do you see programs like this that meaningfully put land back into the hands of Native peoples play a role in some of the environmental justice work that's moving forward?
Yeah, so I think the first thing we should always do is really, because we as a nation haven't dealt with it, we have to always acknowledge that many of our ancestors, and I have white ancestors, we went to Africa, we stole human beings, we shipped them across an ocean, stole land from indigenous people, and then put African slaves into work, and that the wealth of this country, and if you live in America in some way, shape, or form, you have benefited from stealing human beings and stealing land. We haven't dealt with that yet, right? Just like we haven't dealt with a whole bunch of other issues, like, you know, we talk about women's equity and whatnot. Well, until we see equal pay, we can't even talk about women's equity. So I think we always kind of have to start with like those really, like that basic premise. And with regard to, you know, kind of the land buyback program, this is kind of my new thing right now, is E equals MC squared. Equity equals cash money squared. So if you want to talk about equity, you got to put money into it, and you got to put a lot of money into it. So if we're going to talk about the land buyback program, you know, well, let's put real money into it so that we can begin restoring native homelands. And you know, there are movements towards that, and I think that we need to be supportive of that. And you know, a lot of people get all scared. Oh, well, the Indians are going to take all their land, and you know, they're going to make everyone live by their rules. And it's like, well, no, we gave up a lot of North America so that the United States could have a country. There's areas that we said we want to keep for ourselves, and those are the areas we want to talk about. I'll be honest, Indians don't like taxes. We don't like being taxed. So if we have jurisdiction over private lands, you're probably going to pay less taxes. And we have a pretty good track record of taking care of those natural resources and land. So your quality of life might actually improve under a native jurisdiction as opposed to other jurisdictions. So I think that's, you know, in the land buyback program in general, I have a lot of, you know, kind of very specific ideas on how we can improve that, but it's definitely something that we have to like improve and we have to invest in. And again, like this idea, E equals MC squared, equity equals money cash squared.
Amazing. I think I am having a lightning to my forehead moment here. So thank you very much for that. And so let's say, because we're part of this whole AirMiner event is building companies. Let's say someone is at a early stage company. They have intention on putting cash money where equity is at. You know, where would they start? Let's say building a fund that goes towards these kind of programs. Is there a contact to speak to about, seeing that the US program is close to the end here?
I think that there are some really great individual organizations. You know, the other thing I think is Native Nation governments themselves. So for example, our business, the Wolakota business, we actually lease land from another tribal corporation. That was a tribal corporation that was set up in the 1940s to stop fractionated interest. And it's one of the best organizations in the country at just buying stolen land back. Like literally, that's what the job of the organization is to go buy land that was stolen from us and bring it back under our control and jurisdiction and ownership. So I think that, you know, if you want to be local, who are the indigenous governments located near you? What are they doing? How can you support them? And then this is one thing, like personally, I'm trying to do better at now, is like, I'm always speaking on the indigenous issues, but you know, we also always need to make sure that we as whatever your privilege is, you got to be supporting other people. So, you know, I got a little platform. You got to make sure we're supporting all BIPOC people, and everyone who's experiencing some form of systemic injustice. Like we got to start using more of our privilege to begin just saying, hey, support indigenous people, but hey, you got a lot of Black farmers that are going through issues right now. There's people all over the world and so we just need to all be supporting each other.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there. I'm glad you mentioned Black farmers, because we have lost lots of land as well. And part of the federal response to that should be maybe some special incentives and benefits for those farmers who want to use practices that are capturing and sequestering CO2. Another, I mentioned the incentives earlier, that they are at the moment not geared in such a way that they would provide equity and being inclusive on the federal side. And then there is a federal agency, Health and Human Services, has a community economic development program which community-based organizations can apply to. And we're certainly hopeful that those in Baltimore will join in that program and collaborate with us and maybe invest in what we're doing there, and certainly across other parts of the country where we may be active with our process. So there are ways to innovatively get the community involved in the economics and in the financing and in the ownership of some of these carbon capture initiatives that could happen across the country.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Annie.
Yeah. This panel has been awesome. Meghana, you're moderating so well. And it's been lovely to hear from everyone. I've learned so much. I had a question on how all of you think about navigating the relationship between the global north and the global south, especially considering the reparations that need to be paid and the responsibility that, if you would call it, developed countries have for other countries in the world. You kind of have already talked to it a little bit. Heloise, you mentioned that you opened up opportunities on the global voluntary carbon markets. And Joe, you've also talked about making partnerships global. I'm wondering how you guys think about that tension of honoring indigenous peoples and indigenous practices, as opposed to kind of working on around the world and working to make sure that we are paying our debts globally.
Eloise, would you like to start?
Yes, sure. So for us, this exciting challenge at the moment is, carbon, as the title of this conference, carbon removal taking flight. It's really exciting to see in the global north this massive thirst for sequestering carbon, removing carbon, and that's translating into an increasing price in the voluntary carbon markets. And it's happening very fast. And even in the last 6 months, I think the price in the voluntary market is tripled at least. And I see the challenge is the mechanisms that can capture that capital, that finance, and ensure that it is reaching the global south. And just our own experience from HUSK is that, there's only one certification that exists at the moment that enables us to do that, which is the European Biochar Certificates Carbon Sink, and we're the only company that has yet done that. So it's still a very emerging, incipient space where there's pioneers needed to try and test and pilot and fail and try again. But I do think it is evolving and is maturing. So I know that towards the end of this year, the VERA standard, the VCS, will produce a more robust methodology to enable biochar producers in the global south to access carbon finance in an accredited way. And what I just hope is that it's done in a way that is not expensive, that is not complicated, that does not involve multiple auditing systems that are just out of the capacity of the recipients. So I will be advocating for all of these systems to be as, we need traceability, yes, and we definitely want to avoid any kind of carbon fraud. However, there needs to be a balance, and this needs to be doable in countries where people might not be literate, but they might have a smartphone. And so there's still a lot of experimentation, I think, that needs to happen. But at the same time, it's really exciting because there's definitely interest, and there is definitely, people are putting their money where their mouth is, and there is a kind of a global concern, finally, it seems, to address climate change, and the mechanisms need to be developed more. So from our side, and I'm just going to on that front make a small plug. We have 25 carbon credits left on sale in our website, huskventures.com. So, this is part of what we're doing, is we are trying to channel finance. So if there's any of those 41 people that might be listening to this webinar, and you go to huskventures.com, you can buy a carbon credit that is certified, and that will go to helping a Cambodian farmer getting carbon into their soil. I'll stop the ad.
Annie, thank you for your question. Let me try to answer it in a couple of ways. First of all, carbon capture technology, to the extent that you would want it to be inclusive and benefit the entire planet as opposed to just the global north, let's say, has to be intentionally designed to do so. I mean, you have to be thoughtful about, you know, what kinds of things can you do, what kinds of tweaks can you make to your equipment or to your process, and how can you create multiple benefits on top of carbon capture. So, for example, in many developing countries, wastewater treatment is a limited opportunity, in part because of capital costs. And as I said earlier, if you're able to create a situation where you can make the mechanical part of wastewater treatment for an urban area smaller by creating space in which to spray partially clean water into a field and create an opportunity for carbon capture by growing our crops in that field, in that spray field, probably a couple hundred acres. What if we then harvest those crops, and instead of making a filler powder in Liberia, what if we made a charcoal cooking fuel that reduced the pressure to cut down trees to make charcoal for cooking? We could do that, and that would minimize the carbon that's being taken out of. The trees that are being cut to make a cooking fuel, but still solve a problem that those communities have. So we need to be thoughtful about. We need to be encouraging creative applications of carbon capture that create multiple benefits, especially for those countries that most need the help. By the last little commercial, if to the extent there are any participants, I think I have something in the chat that includes my email address and some other information about what we're up to. And we're active right now in Maryland. We're just beginning a partnership with Dominion Energy in Virginia. We have a California operating affiliate that we'd like to get off the ground with some work. So we are looking for a few additional places to deploy our process, and would welcome folks contacting us to see how we might work with you.
Thanks, Joe.
I kind of thinking a little bit about this to some extent. You know, I'm writing a piece right now for, you know, that would go on a blog for an investment firm about the new kind of European ESG investment criteria, and kind of saying, you know what, you know, you can like attack this and just do the minimal amount and check off all the boxes, or you can really lean into soul of kind of what ESG is supposed to mean in that, you know, from an investment criteria, and say and take a look at your own kind of investments in it's kind of big global investment companies and investment managers. Say, are my investments benefiting place-based work on the ground that is effective and having an actual impact on people and climate? And that's not enough just to place your money. Am I doing everything that I can to put people who represent those communities on my corporate board of directors? Do I have partnerships with any local communities to bring those individuals and help them step into leadership roles or to develop into leadership roles within your company? You know, what can you do to really lean in and not just check the ESG box, but to actually be about, you know, these big words like justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, etc. And I think that that's going to be a part of the big path forward if we're going to, you know, address these global differences, kind of like we talked the global south north. And then also just being honest about like where that's coming from. Like the European countries not off the hook. Spain, Portugal, Italy, etc. They've plundered some continents.
They have, and it's a big topic, and I'm glad we're even getting to touch on it. Neil, do you have a question?
Yeah, sure. And I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but thanks for taking my question. First of all, thanks, Henny. I'm with AirMiners. I've been moderating in the background a little bit, and I really appreciate all the panelists. I will recognize that I am on unceded Duwamish land, and the Seattle, Chief Seattle quote kind of rang for me, because that's where I've personally always been from. So that feels like a little slice of home. So I appreciate that from Wizipan. That was really cool. I just wanted to ask, what have you seen for all the panelists in any order, effective ways of going to justifiably skeptical communities with a project and getting buy-in? I heard a lot of listening that can be done from Joe with your example of, hey, maybe look at your byproducts also solving another problem that is another local problem. And certainly Wizipan, in the chat, you gave me the tip about, yeah, I mean, land recognition alone is a good step and a good place to start. What other techniques and projects have you seen that have done a really good job of this, where you maybe had someone come in and say, I'd like to do a project, and the populations there is like, I'm a little bit skeptical because frankly, there's a really, really, really long history of these things not actually working out in our favor. What do those techniques look like? I'd be interested to hear.
Well, let me say what we're doing in Baltimore. We've been meeting with the communities, exploring with them locations that they would like to see treated in terms of brownfield sites, and also working with organizations that are already, we did some very small planting with just a few weeks we had last spring or last early summer in a community garden, where the community garden had some contamination in a part of it, and we planted our crops in that section as a way of beginning to try to clean that up so folks could use that part to grow food and not feel concerned that they were going to get poisoned or something. So the key part is getting in early, getting to know the organizations, work with them, plan with them, show them, give them opportunity to touch and feel. That's another reason why we wanted to grow the crop, so people could have a view. And we're going to start off slowly this spring with larger plantings, probably in one location. And we'll be inviting the community in over time to take a look at what the crops look like. And then we're going to be demonstrating to them as well what some of the bioproducts that we make look like. And to the extent that some of those could be used in the community, we're going to try to demonstrate that use as well.
Thank you, Joe. I know we're very short on time, but I know Laura has a question specifically for Eloise on if you're running into similar issues. So maybe, Eloise, you can close us out here. Take us home.
Okay, well, seeing is believing. So if you want to persuade a farmer to use biochar or a carbon-based fertilizer, then you need to somehow get it in the soil, show how he will have healthier crops, he will use less chemicals on his land, she will use less water because the soil is holding the water, and there will be more kilos of vegetables at the end of the day. So our work is very much, working with demo farms, trials, super farmers. We've got an ambassador scheme going where women can sell to other women, and just really making it real. No one wants to read no Cambodian farmer wants to read a peer-reviewed paper from Harvard saying that the increase in their yield will be 26%. But if the farmer next door says, use this because you'll sell more in the market this Saturday, then that's how it works. So yep. I guess in our space, seeing is believing, and just giving people access to see the benefits of getting carbon back into the soil.
Thank you so much for that. And I think with that, we will to the panel. I want to thank all three of you for sharing your experiences and for engaging in this beautiful discussion. I feel like I have been so inspired and learned so much. And yes, thank you so much for the time that you have taken, to our panelists and all of our participants. Thank you for the questions. And so with that, I think we will conclude today's panel, and I encourage all of our participants to go back to the main stage for the closing keynote. So thank you so much for being here today.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone. Thanks for your organization. Okay. Bye.
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 Thank you.